You're listening to Environmentally Speaking, a weekly podcast diving into legal matters surrounding the environment, public utilities, energy, zoning, and permitting laws in Rhode Island and the surrounding areas, with your host, Marissa Desitel.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Environmentally Speaking.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marissa Desitel, an environmental attorney.
And I'm Clarice. Usually I come in with questions, comments, and topics, but this week it's even better. I'm coming in with a special guest. I'm here with Bob Rocha, an associate curator of science and research.
I think it's Rocha.
Rocha. Oh, no.
Bob, you should know that Clarice has many talents. Reading
Not
aloud is
close.
not
And
one
she
of
should
them.
know because it's a Portuguese name.
Oh, there's no excuse.
Fired from my own
Yeah, do you want to log off and me and Bob can continue on?
Bob, take over. It is now the Marissa and Bob podcast. I'm done.
Everybody gets a mulligan.
Well, thank you, Bob, for joining us. We are very excited to have you join us, and mea culpa for the last name, but we're really happy to have you come and talk to us about all things whales.
No, thank you for the invitation to be here.
I'm particularly excited because my office deals with offshore wind projects, and one of the most prominent issues that has come out of these projects from my client's perspective are the whale deaths that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
As a result of the offshore wind activity. That's kind of the position that I've heard. So I'm excited to hear what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of threads or hypotheses to why this is taking place. Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this unusual mortality event in which an unusual number of whales are dying started happening and was labeled as such in 2016 before any kind of sighting, testing, and those kinds of activities were taking place.
Yep.
And we can also keep in mind that because we've done a good job of protecting certain species, especially the humpback whale, and 10 of the 14 recognized populations of humpbacks around the planet have been taken off the endangered species list. So we have more whales. And the fact that the ocean's warming up a little more quickly than it had been, in terms of like when certain temps hit at certain latitudes, if the food is coming up earlier, the whales are starting to follow. So we may have more whale. So there's more whales. There are more whales slightly earlier in the year because these are migratory animals. Baleen whales that have fairly predictable migrations. And then and there's all this shipping along the coast. It's a recipe for animals to get harmed. And quite a few of the necropsies that have been done for these whales have shown blunt force trauma, some sort of collision with ships.
Yep.
There are some, I haven't seen the results, or the results haven't been published. So it's hard to know what's killed those. I think it's too easy for certain people to just blame it on sighting of turbines, and you certainly can't blame it on the turbines and the platforms because they're not there yet. You can't blame it on something that that doesn't exist. But I've noticed that those that are screaming the loudest to blame it on the turbines and say, let's stop, let's re-examine, are well funded by the petroleum industry, which is ironic in some regards because they're also some of the folks that are investing money in offshore wind.
Yeah. So I appreciate the immediate, clear understanding of the species itself. Bob, would you say that you'd consider yourself an expert? And if so, could you give us a little background about why you might
An
be
expert on what?
Whales and where you're working and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
I would say I've become very well versed on the questions that people ask a lot, because I work here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, been here almost 19 years.
Wow.
You know, I'm mostly involved in education here, but have become a part of our curatorial department as of a couple of years ago. And an exhibit we opened in 2018, right in our lobby, was designed to answer the questions people ask. They'll walk in, they see 3 really big skeletons, blows their minds because these things are so big. You've got a 66-foot blue whale and a 49-foot North Atlantic right whale and a 37-foot humpback whale. And it leads to a lot of questions, whether the front desk gets the questions, my coworkers get them, the volunteers that are here get them, and they all get passed along. And eventually I'm the one who has to either answer them or provide the information to the docents in the front desk to answer them. And we decided, well, let's make an entire exhibit to answer those. And there is certainly an extra focus on the North Atlantic right whale because it's such a highly endangered species. And also because we host the annual meeting of the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium just about every year. And if it's not here, it's usually up in Nova Scotia. And I think the other thing that I become really well versed on is industrial whaling in the 1900s. So I co-authored a paper with a couple of others about the number of whales killed in the 1900s by industrial whaling. So, you know, the factory ships, mechanized vessels, as opposed to the vessels that sailed out of this harbor until 1925. You know, that, you know, we consider that Yankee whaling under sail, all wind and muscle power, as opposed to diesel power, which is in industrial whaling. I hope that answers the question.
Yes,
Okay.
it definitely does. Yeah, thank you. You said 19 years.
Just
That's
about, yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah. I never expected to work in a museum, and I never thought I'd be here for 19 years. And I think one of the reasons I'm here is because this place keeps me curious. Like, I haven't left because I learn something new every day.
Every day. That's
just
amazing.
About every day. And
yeah.
Then I get to do cool stuff like podcasts and TV interviews and radio interviews. And as I was discussing with Clarice earlier, it's also been a good excuse to improve my Portuguese, because I work with some folks here who speak Portuguese. And,
nice.
And I joined the Azorian Maritime Heritage Society here, and we own 3 Azorian whale boats, and you know, we get to expand that culture as well. And you know, and I'll just throw in that's another important thread in this museum, is that the fact that we not only discuss and show whale skeletons, talk about whale biology and conservation, but there's culture, history, and art here as well. You know, because the whaling industry went all around the world and brought all kinds of culture and art back, and just really interesting things here. And there's always something new to learn.
I was going to ask, can you give us an example
of something new that I've learned?
Yes.
I like that question.
Well, good example would be when I first started here, there were 4 known species of this worm called Osidax. Osidax is this thing that lands on whales that have sunk to the bottom. And these worms, these things that actually are able to dissolve the oil in whale bones, there were 4 known species. And since I've been here, I think there's now 23. Because the researchers are able to get down, mostly using either ROVs, you know, remotely operated vehicles, or an autonomous underwater vehicle with camera, and they take pictures or they take samples back, and they're able to learn about these really interesting things that break down dead whales.
That makes a lot of sense. If something dies in the ocean, it's not going to float to the surface. It's got to go somewhere. So of course, as an ecosystem, that makes a lot of sense. So there's 23.
At least, yes.
At least.
Wow. And I just looked them up.
Yeah, it's called Osedax. It means bone devourer.
Apparently, they're also known as zombie worms.
Zombie
Oh.
worms and bone-eating
Oh.
snot flower and other lovely
Yeah.
worms.
What? That's
All right,
disgusting.
listeners, you have to look them up. They look very psychedelic.
And those red things that you see on them are typically their gills.
How big are these?
They look really small.
I think they're all different sizes, but I don't know that they get too big.
Are we talking inches or feet?
Inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's like a nightmare if
It's
it's
not
longer
like
than
those
that.
deep sea tube worms. Those things are feet tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And
And another thing that I learned as the result of my paper is that there were, in the 1900s, we killed 2,894,040 whales. And those are the ones that we know about. And those are the big species. And that paper doesn't include orcas, other dolphin species, beaked whales, porpoises. It's just the big whales.
and from what how did they die? How were they killed?
They were caught by diesel-powered ships. And for a while, they were processed at sea, or they were dragged across to a shore factory. But then starting in 1924, the first floating factory ship was created. And you could bring so the diesel catcher boat would go get the whale, bring it back to the factory ship, and then they would just pull this whale up the slipway out of the ocean, and then the entire whale would disappear. And we just turn it into a whole variety of products.
Wow.
And so because Yankee whaling, again, wind and muscle power, could basically catch the three species of right whale, bowhead whale, humpback, and sperm, and occasionally like pilot whales and that, and gray whales too, the whales that were slow enough for dudes rowing to be able to catch, they really didn't go after blue, fin, say, minke, Brutus whales. So when factory ships started, they were dealing with full-on populations. So in the early days of going after those species, they were killing thousands.
And it sounds like it wasn't just an issue of speed, but it was also the idea of, if it's like you were saying, these Yankee boats, it was also the idea of, once these people caught the whales, all of the men who were powering the boat then had to stop powering the boat to process what they've caught.
And that was after they had rowed the whale back to the ship. So you get the same crew of people hunting, rowing it back. And if there had only been one boat in the water, then there were other men on the ship that could take over the process of flensing and trying out the whale. But it was all human power and complex machines doing all the work. Whereas with the factory ships, it was all mechanized. And I remember one quote as I was working on the paper from a publication. This was from like the 1930s. A guy from the Coast Guard had been on a ship as a spotter, and he said, yep, they could take a 90-foot whale and make it disappear in 90 minutes.
Does anyone else get upset about that? It's just me.
I think
It's
gross.
mind-blowing to to think about how quickly we were pulling these just populations of whales out of the ocean.
Yep.
And it was obviously for economics, and it took a while for people, it took decades to realize we're just going to like totally obliterate all these species. And so like even when the International Whaling Commission started in the 40s, it was created not to protect the whales, but to protect the industry. Like, how can we do this sustainably so the industry can continue? Its focus has changed over the years.
Yeah.
Like 1931, I think the whaling nations, all right, we're going to stop going after bowhead whales. In 35, they decided, okay, we're going to stop going after right whales. In 66, it was blue whales. I think 65 were humpbacks. And there have been some others, I think in the early 70s, gray whales. And I don't know that it was much of an economic harm to them to stop going after those species, because I think they really weren't finding any of them anyway. And as I found out in the research I was doing with my two co-authors, that the Soviets especially were lying about what they were catching.
No.
They would say, we got this
Get
number of these things, when it was like they say, it was this number of humpbacks, and they're actually getting fin and sei whales and other things they weren't supposed to be catching. And they were killing undersized and all of that.
Bob, what is the name of the article that you authored? And if our listeners wanted to read it, where could they find it?
So it's called Emptying the Oceans, a summary of industrial whaling catches in the 20th century, and was published in NOAA's Marine Fisheries Review in 2014.
I'll write that down.
I was going to say, Clarice, maybe drop that into the show notes if you can. Yeah, great.
And my co-authors, who have much more experience with this, especially Yulia, because she's originally from like an hour away from Moscow. So not only does she understand whaling, she understands the language.
Yeah, that's
and
helpful.
She was able to communicate with several Russian biologists who were on these ships and kept accurate records at risk to their own lives, while they had another set of books for what was going to get reported to the International Whaling Commission. So Yulia and Phil had these conversations with these people. It's pretty impressive what they were able to do. And there's a movie called The Witness is a Whale, and I know some of those interviews are in that movie too.
The Witness is a Whale.
Yes.
We're gonna write that down too.
The two folks who made that, Nick and Cheryl, D-E-A-N, Dean, came out here, and I interviewed with them for hours. And unfortunately, all of it got cut, and I didn't make the movie. But what the finished product is for the film is really, really good. They interviewed Phil, they interviewed Yulia, and they interviewed a couple of these, at least one of these Russian biologists. And, that helps to tell a story about industrial whale hunting.
And if there is any particular message that you would want our listeners to know about the museum and the work that you're doing every day, what would it be?
I'll say a couple of things. I've probably said this 500 times. The museum suffers from its name, Bedford Whaling Museum, because we're much more about whaling and dead whales and dead people. It's arts, history, science, and culture. And I think we do a great job of not only using the science to talk about what's happening now and get out a conservation message, but the history part of what we tell, the arts, the history, and the culture, as they tie into not only the whaling industry, but also the region, because we started in 1903 as the Old Dartmouth Historical Society, with the biggest story being whaling. I would say that if you want to learn about a variety of things, come to the New Bedford Whaling Museum. People walk out of here pleasantly surprised 99% of the time. We had one review from one family that looked up and saw the skeletons and felt very sad and left. I can understand that, but I will say that the skeletons we have did not come to us as the result of the whaling industry. Two of them were ship strikes, recent, one 1998, one 2004. The sperm whale, who's in a different gallery, we don't know why he died, but he washed ashore in Nantucket in 2002. He may have had decompression sickness. And then the humpback skeleton, that one's from 1932. He was a young one. He was only 3 years old. And we're not sure why he died either. Although there was one clue, and it was his tongue was missing. And there is a species of dolphin that likes to rip out the tongue of its victims.
Come on.
What? The orca.
Dolphins are like so sweet. But
orcas are the largest species of dolphin. And that's one hint that they've been around. They like to rip there's a whole lot of muscle and meat and energy right there. And there's no bone in the way, right?
Ugh, Bob, that's gross.
Yeah.
What
It's
a
like
great story.
It's
I
a
know.
dolphin delicacy.
Yeah. And and we don't see orcas out here much. It was a big deal 3 or 4 weeks ago that there were 4 orcas seen off Nantucket. There was a whale watch boat or a charter fishing boat out there, and there were 4 of them swimming across in a line, like as if they're lined up to run a race or swim
Yeah.
a race,
Yep.
swimming along. We rarely see them out here.
Wow.
They're around every once in a while. And there's one, I think it's been nicknamed Old Tom, who will just show up.
Anybody have any tongues?
Hmm?
So
I
did
don't-
anybody have any tongues? Just like little souvenir in the fin?
So
Yeah.
that's just Bob, that just made me think of what we started this conversation with, where you were saying you've been there for 19 years because you learn something new every day. I mean,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
just taught us 2 things in 30 minutes about, I had no idea that dolphins were so brutal.
Well, at least that
Oh, yeah.
one species.
Haven't you
fascinating.
ever
In many ways,
heard of the
dolphins are
book Why You Want to
jerks
Punch a
to
Dolphin in
each
the
other anyway.
Face?
Say that again, Clarice.
I was gonna say, haven't you guys ever heard of the book? I think it's called Reasons Why You Should Punch a Dolphin or something like that.
No, I have not heard of it.
I will send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, they can be jerks.
Yeah.
And there's 35 or 37 species of dolphin. And,
Huh.
and then there's the 4 river dolphins.
Yes.
What is a river dolphin?
River dolphin is one of these, like some people call them pink dolphins,
Yep.
and they have very long beaks with lots of little sharp teeth and tiny little eyes.
They're
Because
freaky
they're often
looking.
in muddy water, so they really rely on on their ability to echolocate to find their food. And they're not that big, and they don't really have a dorsal fin so much as they have a hump, like a ridge,
Okay.
so they don't roll over. And since I started here, there was one species that's been declared functionally extinct, and that was the one in the Yangtze River. It was called the Baiji, Baiji. And in 1980, I think they knew about like 400 of them in the river, and by 2004, 2006, they couldn't find any.
Mm.
And it's pollution, it's
Yeah. Human interference.
accidental kills, purposeful kills, misuse of the habitat, all those things.
Yep.
So I do have to circle back.
Okay.
Earlier when we were talking, you had said that there was a myth about the right whale's name.
Yes.
And it sounds like a personal mission to dispel that myth.
It's a mission.
What is the myth?
Okay.
I need to know.
The myth is that the right whale is called the right whale because it was the right whale to hunt, because they live close to the coast and they're slow, and they're so blubbery that when you kill them, they float, and and that helps you with your turning the whale into money. The thing is, and I have to say, I have a coworker here who's done more reading on this than I have, and he's the one who's dragged me into it, willfully, by the way. So if you go back and you think about the name right whale, the bowhead whale used to be referred to as the Greenland right whale. The North Atlantic right whale used to be referred to as the black right whale. The scientific name Eubelina glacialis means true whale or right whale.
Is there any wrong whales?
For the right whale. Yeah, those are the ones that get hit by the boats. What they do badly on news quizzes. And really the right part of it had much more to do with the baleen in their mouths. This was the right whale to hunt for commercial purposes because of the baleen. So bowhead whales can be enormous, like 60, 65 feet long, and tall enough that the baleen that's in their mouth is like 14 feet tall.
Oh my God.
Because humpbacks and blue whales and fin whales, they have like flat upper jaws, whereas the 3 species of right whale and the bowhead, their upper jaw is arched. So think of it as like half of a McDonald's sign.
Mhm.
And because they're arched, there's more room in the mouth. And it's just, the shape of the animal. And they don't have dorsal fins, which is a major problem for them with not being seen, because they come up to breathe or to feed near the surface and there's no fin visible.
Yep.
But these animals, so the bowhead baleen could be, 12, 13, 14 feet tall. And it was considered of better quality than right whale baleen for the market. And this was back before people invented plastic. Baleen is basically Mother Nature's plastic. And you can, because it's flexible and pliable, and you can use it in corsets and hoop skirt frames and collar stiffeners and whips, mattresses, all kinds of interesting things, goggles, umbrellas, parasols. So the right part of the right whale refers as much to the baleen as it does to anything else. And yes, right whales are found near the coast and they're blubbery, and so are bowheads, at least in terms of blubbery. Bowhead's more likely to float than a right whale. If you look at the logs of going after North Pacific right whales, especially in the 1800s, between 1840 and 1880, when we almost wiped them out, a lot of these animals sank. They may refloat later once gases start to build up as they're starting to decompose, but they didn't always float. And once you harpooned one, they respond really violently. And there's nothing right about that for a guy who's in a 30-foot boat. You ask people that are working on current disentanglement of whales, and they all say trying to disentangle a humpback is a whole lot easier than trying to disentangle a right whale, because the right whales get really skittish and they don't respond well to getting in close with the Zodiac. So all that together, calling them the right whale for all those other reasons really doesn't work. The right part of it had to do with the fact that they had baleen and they were the right ones to get for the market. And it's more attributable to bowhead whales than it is to right whales.
Yep.
Because in other parts of the world, they're the Nordkaper. They have all these other names that I don't even remember because they're foreign words. And like in Portuguese, Baleia Franca is how you would call a right whale.
Clarice has a big smile on her face right now.
And I think
I'm just giggling. I just love
and the bowhead in Portuguese is either Baleia arctica or Baleia polar, because I know the polar bear is Ursa polar. We just had an exhibit here on
polar whale.
Yeah.
Basically. I just love the word whale in Portuguese.
Baleia.
Yeah. Like, it just sounds goofy.
Except for sperm whale.
I don't know that one.
It's cachalot.
Oh.
And that's almost the same as the French word. The French put an E on the end of it. The German word for whale is better. It's Wal. Like the sperm whale is the pot vowel.
That just sounds angry, which doesn't surprise us as Germans.
It's a whole other topic.
Yeah. For another day.
Hey, speaking of myths, can I get at one other thing? And it's more of a mislabeling, or it's like let's call it this because it'll grab people's attention. And that's when someone like a lobsterman or a fisherman ends up in a whale's mouth and they say, oh, it got swallowed. It didn't get swallowed. The guy, whoever ends up in the whale's mouth, is in the whale's mouth, but he didn't go down the throat. Because there's only one whale with a throat big enough to swallow a person, and that's a sperm whale. So I love to tell groups, especially if there's like 10, 12 people, I said, okay, if we were all we could all have this conversation in a blue whale's mouth and it couldn't swallow any of us, because the blue whale's throat's only the size of a basketball.
What?
Because they're eating small food.
Yeah.
They don't need to have a huge throat. Whereas sperm whales are eating
that makes
squid
sense.
that might be 3, 4, 5, 10 feet long. And contrary to popular belief, sperm whale don't just eat giant squid. They'll eat whatever squid's available. And there's 300 species of squid in the ocean. That's something that that's one of those things that I learned while here on the job, that there are 300 different species of squid. And like
does the person never leave the mouth? If a person goes into a whale's mouth,
Mhm.
first off, stay on land. If a person goes into a whale's mouth,
What
do
happens?
they just never leave the mouth?
No, they get
Or
spit
like,
back
do they
out.
go, no,
And
no.
that's-
I mean, eventually, because they're telling the story, but like, do they just like roll under the tongue for a minute?
I hope not.
Where are they hanging out?
They're probably sitting on top of the tongue, just, probably, like holding on onto the baleen so their feet don't get stuck in the throat. I don't know, but
Wait, this is a real like thing? This happens?
Yes.
So there was
yes. You've never heard this story?
just off the
No.
coast. If it wasn't last summer, it was 2021.
Yeah.
I was fishing and he ended up in a humpback whale's mouth
Yeah.
and he got coughed back up. And there was a couple of kayakers just a month or two ago off the West Coast, I think, ended up in
It's
a
wild.
humpback's mouth. But the whale can't swallow these people.
I talked about this for days.
Wow.
Remember
No, I'd
reading
never heard that.
blue whale, a full-grown blue whale's mouth, when you expand out the throat pleats, it's big enough to hold 2 full-grown elephants. They
Wow.
can. So when those throats expand, the volume of water in that throat is equal to the volume of the whale itself.
What?
But then they use those throat muscles to push all the water through the baleen and out, so they can just swallow the krill. Or in the case of the right whales, the copepods.
And oh my God, and the throat is only a basketball.
Yeah, for a blue whale.
And
actually one of the little tools we have when we got school groups coming through, we have this cardboard ring and they wrote like blue whale throat diameter, and we'll put it over a kid's head, but it doesn't go past the shoulder.
well, Bob,
I
this
have
is
to
my
go to
new
this-
That's the
nightmare.
funniest thing, huh?
This is my new nightmare.
I'm going to have to come check this museum out. This place sounds awesome.
And we take up a whole city block too. We have like 20,
Yeah, I've been
23
by it.
galleries. Yeah.
I've been by it.
Yeah.
So are you there 7 days a week, Monday through Friday?
Mhm.
What's your schedule?
My schedule is typically during the week, typically the weekdays. But we're open 7 days a week. In the winter, we'll close on Mondays in January, February, and March.
Yep. Okay.
And for all of you Moby Dick enthusiasts, we do a nonstop 25-hour reading of Moby Dick on the first weekend in January that doesn't involve January 1st or 2nd. And that's because when Herman Melville sailed out of this harbor in 1841, he sailed out January 3rd, 1841 on the first voyage of the whale ship Acushnet. And his experiences there and his experiences talking to other people, including the grandson of Owen Chase, who was on the Essex when that got rammed and sunk by a whale in 1820, led to him writing Moby Dick, which was not a very popular book when it came out. And now it's insanely popular.
Yeah. Yep.
And we have, again, 25 hours nonstop, people 5 or 10 minute blocks of time reading the book. And Clarice, we also do a Portuguese mini marathon of about 4 hours. Because
How many times can you hear Balea?
Well, I've got,
funny.
no, I have it right here. I've got the Portuguese full version of it, but we also commissioned, meaning the 2 previous Portuguese consuls to New Bedford, commissioned an artist to cut Moby Dick down into 3 hours and 45 minutes. And then we read that. We have everybody gets a 5-minute piece of the book. We just one after another reading in Portuguese.
There we
And-
go.
And
No
we
descriptions.
and we zoom in with people in Faial, Lisboa, Cabo Verde, and Terceira.
Very
We'll
cool.
read it the
Well,
same, and we turn off the audio and just keep the video on. So call me Ishmael in Portuguese. Trate-me por Ismael.
well, listeners, you can join New Bedford Whaling Museum in 2 languages. I
Yes.
love this. Well, Bob, thank you so much. I've got new nightmares. I've learned new facts. I don't think I'm going to ever learn how to swim. It was on my bucket list, but
You should. No,
I don't know about that.
I don't know.
I don't know
Stay
about
on land, Clarice.
Yeah,
You
I'm
got
gonna stay
enough-
on
You got
land.
enough problems.
that. Yeah. This podcast has renewed new fears in me of chickens in the ocean.
Did you say chickens?
Oh yeah, that was another podcast episode.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
It's a long story.
Yeah, it is. Bob, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I
Yeah,
will
same here.
absolutely come in and visit,
Yeah.
and I will ask if you are available to say hello.
Please do.
Thanks again.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. If you have any questions, comments, want to tell us what you've learned from this episode, write in at help@decitelesq.com. We are on the socials at Decetel Law on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can catch our videos on YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Environmentally Speaking. If you're in need of an environmental attorney, we are here to help. Call us at 401-477-0023 or visit our website at www.decitellaw.com. That's www.desautellaw.com.